Welcome to the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. We're going to explore ways to sharpen our diagnostic skills, find learning resources, and hear from experts in the automotive field. This episode is brought to you by L1 Automotive Training and Keith Perkins. If you're looking for education on module programming, J2534, EEPROM work, key and immobilizer, electrical diagnostics, or drivability diagnostics, Keith has a website, l1training.com, that's got over 60 hours of training videos on all those subjects and more. When I first started out doing mobile, I utilized Keith's videos on module programming in J2534 in order to get my head wrapped around what I would need for the tooling, the computers, the software setups, what kind of obstacles I would be up against when I'm out there programming modules on cars. And it was a huge benefit to me. And I continue to use the training videos that he has on his website. So I strongly recommend checking out l1training.com. The link is in the show notes. Hey, what's going on, automotive world? Welcome to another episode of the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. My name is Sean Tipping, and I will be your host once again for this week's episode. Thank you so much for joining me. Today on the show, I'm going to be talking more about General Motors. We did General Motors Most Bus last week. This one is also going to be General Motors, and it does have to do with networks, but this is really going to be about the Global B or VIP architecture that we see on some 2020 plus General Motors vehicles. So these are fairly new vehicles to the aftermarket. If you work in the dealership world, you probably have had your hands on plenty of them. I really haven't a whole lot, at least nothing too in-depth until just recently. And so I thought I'd share on the show a little bit about my experience, what we went through, real world on a broken car, the things I learned, and I guess probably the most important thing here is the obstacles that you or your customers might be up against just when replacing components on these vehicles, and something that you really want to be aware of, so you can have a heads up, you can give your customer a heads up, but I'll get to that. But first, I'll just touch on Global B a little bit. You can research this stuff, Google it, use your LLM of choice, and you can learn quite a bit. Again, I'll touch on a few things here that are most relevant to us diagnosing, fixing cars, programming modules, and especially programming modules. But this came out, I think they announced it in 2019. As far as what I could tell, there isn't an actual 2019 model with the Global B architecture. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, because I did find some inconsistencies on the information out there as far as what model applies to Global A or Global B, right? So once we get up around the 2019, 2020 range, it's either going to be Global A or Global B, as far as I'm aware. And so you're going to have one of them. And Global A we've dealt with quite a bit. I've talked about it as far as module programming goes. And when you compare Global A to B, A is very simple, especially the security measure that they use, which isn't even on all of the modules in the car. They're essentially just sharing a PIN number. And yes, it gets a little bit more complex than that, and there are certain modules that are very difficult to program if you're going to try to do them used. But essentially all they're doing is they have a 4-digit PIN number that is hard-coded I shouldn't even say hard-coded. You can change it, but it's in the data of these modules, and then they share it back and forth. If they don't match up, then you get an environmental identifier code, and that can cause more problems. You can actually cause that code to be permanently set in other modules on the car. If enough used modules are put onto a vehicle, it's operated without changing anything. Anyways, that's Global A stuff. And we're becoming more and more familiar with the obstacles and the solutions with Global A. Now we have something new to deal with, and this is going to be quite a bit more challenging because this is much more than just a PIN code that's being shared on these vehicles. It's a fairly advanced security mechanism that is going to be shared between the modules on the car. Now, the one thing I also was finding a tough time really getting a solid answer on, and again, lack of experience here, so maybe somebody else out at the dealership might know the answer to this, is I'm not sure if it's all the modules on the vehicle that are going to be involved with the security, or if it's only a select few. That's something that I guess I'm going to have to research as I continue to work on these vehicles, but I will tell you about the modules that I know for sure are involved with this and the ones that we've experienced issues with. But when it comes to the vehicle platform of Global B or VIP, which is Vehicle Intelligence Program for General Motors, they introduced some stuff like CAN FD, which is flexible data rate, where they can actually speed up the amount of data transfer on a network for a certain period of time, right? They can change the data rate with the CAN FD. There's also over-the-air updates that I guess I really don't know much beyond the fact that they have said that over-the-air updates are possible with these vehicles. When that happens, how exactly that happens, I'm not 100% sure. Again, if somebody's at the dealer and really knows, the inner workings of this stuff, real world, I'd be very interested to talk to you about it. But this is the stuff that they've released out to the public that you can find in, aftermarket documentation. One of the things that when they first released this, they basically said in a service bulletin and some information out there is you need to use the MDI2 as far as the interface to the vehicle for programming. This episode is brought to you by AutoRescueTools.com and Isaac Rodell. If you are looking to get into module programming, but you are not sure what kind of laptop you're going to need or how to set it up for programming, Isaac is your guy. He can set up laptops specifically to do control module programming for specific brands with partitioned hard drives and all the software that you're going to need to do this. He also sells key cutting equipment, scan tools, and other diagnostic equipment. I bought some stuff from him in the past, and the support is phenomenal. So I highly recommend checking out the website. Again, that's AutoRescueTools.com. The link will be in the show notes. Now, you actually do have to have specific scan tool with the CAN FD capability, even just to interact with the car, but a lot of scan tool manufacturers have caught up to that by now. Autel and Topdon are not going to have a problem there necessarily. Now, will you be able to do everything? Probably not, but you can interact with the car, you can clear codes. But for programming, it noted that you're going to want to use the MDI2, and even the older GM interface, the MDI1, is not going to work on these vehicles. Now, they did release an approval for the Cardac 3 to be used on it, and not to say that you couldn't use that JBox on one of these vehicles if you're going to do some programming. I'd still suggest using the MDI2 if you have it on one of these. And I even talked to somebody who does a lot of ADAS work, and they were saying, like, if you're doing a front camera on one of these, not only do you have to use, and this is like, 24, 25 plus, but if you're programming a front camera that's in the windshield, you not only have to use the MDI2, but you have to have an Ethernet cable connected, or it's not even going to communicate correctly to the camera. That's not personal experience. That was someone else telling me that, but that's, kind of where this stuff's going, and you're not going to be able to do that with the JBox. So, if you're going to be programming on these newer General Motors vehicles, I'd highly suggest looking into getting the actual legit GM MDI2. They're not that crazy expensive if you work on a lot of General Motors vehicles. So, take a look, see if you can find one. You can find them used, but be careful because there's clones out there. And if you get a Chinese clone, number one, it's not going to work the same way as a genuine, but they'll actually shut your account down. They are able to tell if there's a Chinese tool being connected to the server when you go to program, and they'll just turn your account off. So make sure that you're not doing that. There's a big banner across the front page of GM AC Delco, and they'll They make it pretty clear that you're not supposed to be doing that. So anyways, in addition to using the MDI2, there are some things on the Scan Tool platform side that are new about this as well that are, I think, actually more helpful, right? Some of the stuff is more complex, more challenging, more obstacles, but once you get into GDS2, which is the General Motors, Scan Tool platform for, they started in 2000, I think 13 on some vehicles, where you could use this, maybe even back to 11 on some of them, but it's, online platform, and you can use a JBox for it or the MDI2. But with Global B, there are some advanced network diagnostic functions that you can run to break it down by network, see where the problems were, the error events that occur. And it actually does make things a lot easier, especially considering how many networks one of these vehicles have. So like I mentioned, starting 2020, 2021, they really kicked off a lot of these vehicles. And you can find a list online. Again, I found some contradicting information on the exact year for each model. So you might have to do some research if you've got a particular vehicle. But what I do know is in 21, this started for the General Motors trucks, specifically the SUVs. I think the pickup trucks were another year or two later. But for the SUVs, GMC Yukon, Chevy Tahoe, this is going to be in 21. And with these vehicles, they have a ton of modules, a ton of networks. And what I mean by that is there could be like 7 or 8 different just CAN networks on the vehicle. And they're going to use a serial data gateway module on these vehicles as well. And this is the central hub for all the communication on the vehicle. It's going to have all of the networks running to it. I was reading on this, getting prepped for this episode, and it says that the gateway module and the radio actually have Ethernet switches in them in order to connect to different networks on the vehicle. And they actually are using a form of Ethernet on some of these networks. I didn't get involved with that particular side of it. The vehicle I was dealing with was actually a network problem on one of the CAN buses. And it was a kind of a challenging series of events when I got involved with this. We were originally called to program a serial gateway control module on this 21 GMC Yukon Denali. Shop had replaced it, brand new from GM. They actually had some GM programming capabilities, but they were not able to get this thing programmed. Now, they were using a JBox, and although that may have potentially brought some problems in, we ended up finding there was other issues as well. And I can go through that with you here. And that's kind of, again, the reason I want to talk about this, because there's some things that you're going to want to have a heads up getting into this. Now, for a new module on one of these, you're still going to go into TLC and you're going to do your normal programming, which you pick the module, you may have to pick the software details, and it shoves the software into the module, right? And again, I'd recommend using the MDI2, and it's pretty straightforward for that part of the process. Now, once you're done with that part, that's where this changes when you're on one of these Global B vehicles. And the part of it that I really want to touch on here is the serial data authentication configuration, or SDAC, SDAC. And this is where every module on the vehicle, according to what GM's saying, that's again why I'm not 100% sure it is every module, but according to the literature, it's every module in the vehicle. So is this small body controllers too? I don't know for sure, but again, I can tell you the ones that I've dealt with. But for now, let's just say it's every module in the vehicle. They have to pass a cryptographic security check, right? It's like a digital handshake that's actually verified through General Motors servers, right? So you need to be connected with an MDI2, have TLC running. The vehicle is connected to the programming device, and you're connected to GM server. And what it's going to do is a handshake between all of the modules, the security gateway, and the GM server. And this is going to verify all of the security keys between all of these modules. Now, this is where it gets way more complex than just sharing a PIN code. They're using again, the cryptographic security check, which, quite honestly is beyond me. I'm not the guy to explain exactly what that means. I'm going to shoot some terms out there that I was reading about as I was trying to get some notes on this. So if you want to research this yourself, you can, and you're smarter about this stuff than I am, you can research it. It is interesting. I just don't claim to be an expert and know all the details, but it's using a SHA 256 code for the actual mathematical function, and it's using a Diffie-Hellman exchange for the information over the potentially public network. Now, again, if you want to research that stuff and figure out more details about that, go ahead. But from what I understand, what I had Claude explain to me like I was a small child was that this is a really complex math equation that is hidden from any person or device that could be viewing it over a network. So not only is the calculation done between the security keys going to be very difficult to crack, but then it's hidden on top of that from anything that might be monitoring network traffic. So pretty complex stuff. But really what it comes down to is after you do the programming on one of these modules, you're going to have to run this SDAC, or the security data authentication configuration. And that's done through TLC. There's a tab at the bottom. You run it. And, oh, you know what? I did forget to mention one thing. And you'll see this on TLC if you're doing this, but these GM Global B vehicles, they're actually programmed with the key off. And it is important you do that, but it gives you fair warning if you're paying attention at all within TLC that, hey, you should have the key off. And honestly, that makes a lot of sense to me, programming a lot of modules. To have the key off for programming, you can shut off a lot of electronic consumers if the key is off. And that probably is the best time to actually be programming a module. Anyways, it's a little different because most vehicles are going to have the key on for programming. Anyways, that security data authentication also happens with key off. But you're running it through TLC. It's a tab at the bottom. If you're familiar with TLC at all, or I should say SPS within TLC, when you're at the screen where you're picking from the different modules on the vehicle, this is where you'll see that SDAC down at the bottom. It's a tab. You click it, and then it tells you, okay, we're going to do this. Make sure the key's off. Go ahead. And then what it's doing is that handshake between all the modules using the serial data gateway module, the MDI, GM server, making sure everybody's okay, right? Is that cryptographic key good between all of them? And this is where it gets real practical for technicians and shops that are listening to this and you're going to program a module on one of these cars. It is a known problem by General Motors where when you run this, you will have a failure, and it will be a failure of a particular module on a car or a single module on a car. And basically you'll get a kickback saying, hey, it failed, but it will tell you there are some different reasons it can fail. And there's a TSB. I'm actually going to share the TSB in the show notes for this episode. So you can read through this, you can save it, you can show your customer, which I think is important. But they have you look at the error message that pops up if it fails. If it passes, just gives you a thumbs up, you're done with that part. It doesn't take very long. It's pretty quick. It's not like, it's way faster than the old 10-minute wait that you had to do on GM vehicles. Anyways, if it fails, it gives you an error message of why it fails. And there's various reasons it can fail beyond a single module. There can be a server issue. I think there's like an unknown error. This is all listed in the TSB. But the error that you might come up with is that there's a single module causing this to fail. And I had actually run into this on Escalades a couple of times where the telematics module would fail. And I believe it's the K73 is the alphanumeric code. And that's how it presents it to you after the failure is you'll get an alphanumeric code. You can just compare it to the module list right there in SPS and say, okay, this is the module that it's referring to. It doesn't spell it out for you, but it says ECU, and then you look at your code. Now, what it's telling you is that that module is the odd man out. He is not in agreement with everybody else. And the unfortunate part is, if you have one module who doesn't agree, when you do that security handshake, it fails and you're going to have codes on, and it may even be a no start condition depending on the vehicle. I have had them where they still start. So I don't know exactly what determines a no start. Maybe it's a period of time after. Either way, if you're going to be sending the vehicle out the door, you can't leave it this way. You're going to have lights, you're going to have codes, you'll have issues. Now, what the TSB instructs you to do is to look at the module that fails. And number one, check the module that failed. And see, here's the thing. I probably should back up and say this. This might not even be the module that you replaced. Okay. And that was the situation on this particular GMC that I was dealing with. And I'll tell you more about that specific car, but let me finish with the security handshake. When you get that failure, that might not be the module that you replaced, that you're programming, that had some sort of issue on the car. It could be another one that otherwise was functioning. Okay. So we'll come back to that, but keep that in mind, that the one that failed the security handshake could have been just fine before you attempted to do the security handshake. Now, again, this is outlined. This is a known problem with GM. What they say to do is check it for an update. If there's an update, update it. Try the STAC again, which also, when it does that, it attempts it 3 times. It'll give you the old GMB bonk if it fails. But you check the update, you go back in, you try it again. If it still fails for the same module, then you are either supposed to pull the fuse or unplug the module from the network and attempt again. And there is a caveat to unplugging. I'll mention that. We'll dive into a real car here. So that's the process of doing that security handshake, and that is a problem that you might run into. Now, why would you want to know this? Well, let me go into this real car and explain why. So we originally called in to do the security data gateway module, which is the central hub for all the communication on the car. We do the programming. That actually goes through just fine, not an issue. But when we went to do the security data handshake on it, we actually got a failure for the cluster. And so this is when I shifted to really looking at all the modules on the vehicle. And I actually branched off into a diag at this point, because when I was really looking at all the codes on the vehicle, after I'd programmed the gateway module, I couldn't do the security data handshake, and it failed for, I think it was P16, which is the instrument cluster. So I was going to go check the instrument cluster for updates, and see if there's any codes in it or see what I had going on in the vehicle. And that's when I was looking at it more closely to my pre-scan, and I'm like, oh, this has a bunch of communication codes in it after I programmed this module. And I was wondering, is this, have I not completed all the steps that I need to? But I also asked the shop, I'm like, hey, what were you guys trying to fix? They're like, oh, we had communication for the camera. We couldn't talk to the camera and was setting these lights and stuff. And we had determined that it had something to do with the connector at the security gateway module. And they had actually, unfortunately, mashed down some pins on the original, so we couldn't even plug the original in. But I was saying to them, I'm like, hey, because I recognized the series of modules that I couldn't talk to, I'm like, this problem might still be here if this is what you were dealing with before. And he kind of looked at it. He's like, yeah, I think that is the same problem. So now I have a halfway programmed module. I can't use the original, and I think I still have the original problem. So I decided to look at the network a little bit, and he wanted me to try to figure it out while I was there. And what I ended up determining, at least part of my problem at the moment, is that one of the independent CAN buses, because there are several on this vehicle, I think it was 5+ separate CAN bus networks, I couldn't talk to anything on that network. And that was actually CAN 8. Now, it didn't have all 8, but this was CAN 8. And this is going to be obviously your gateway module. That's every CAN, but it's going to be the front view camera windshield module, image processing module, and the forward radar sensor. So it's actually, as far as the amount of modules on the network, pretty small. And I couldn't talk to any of that stuff. And again, this is where the network diagnostics function within GDS2 is actually really helpful to break this down pretty simply. But look at wiring diagrams too and say, okay, these are the modules I can't talk to. And this is, the network, they all live on it. Let's see what's going on with this particular network. And it was relatively straightforward. It was an open on the network, and it was something that I've seen on GM vehicles quite often, is there was a pin fitment issue at the camera on the windshield. And I have a feeling that's so common because those cameras get so hot and the pins are so small that the female sides just sort of stretch out a little bit. It could also be from being disconnected and connected, but there was a pin fitment issue at that camera, which we ended up fixing, and that fixed that network. So I think that was the original problem, but the gateway module had been replaced, the original damaged, so now we have to program this new gateway module. So again, I've got communication of the stuff that was originally giving them trouble, and I have the gateway module with its initial programming. Can't do the S-stack, but I'm going to try again now that I fixed this other network problem. I attempted, it gives me the B-bonk, and I still have the same module that's failing, is P16 for the cluster, instrument cluster. Now, the instrument cluster has no codes in it, has nothing wrong with it that I can tell, besides the fact that it won't let this pass. And I check it for updates. It didn't have any updates. I pushed it through anyways. I just was like, well, I'm here. I'm going to program this and see what happens. So I program the module, same thing, kicks me back. Hey, the cluster's the thing that's failing. So now the next step is pull a fuse or unplug the cluster, neither of which are a simple task. Okay. Pulling a fuse, you can't do it because there's two fuses and both fuses feed other things on the car that would need to be powered in order for this to pass. So pulling fuses does not kill just my cluster. It kills other things. Actually, one of them fed power to the MDI2 at the DLC. So I can't pull fuses. So, okay, I got to unplug it. Easier said than done. You got to pull half the dash apart on this to get to the connector at the cluster. And so I tell them that. I'm like, hey, this is the process that we've got to take now. And here's the deal. If we get to it and we unplug it and it then passes the S-stack, according to this technical service bulletin from GM, it says to replace the module. And we have actually seen this to be the case with the telematics modules quite often, where we unplug them and it passes and you replace the telematics module. And unfortunately, you can't just plug in the bad module after you're done. Everybody's going to have codes for, hey, this does not belong. Incorrect identifier. There's an issue with this particular module. They all need to be online when that handshake happens. Okay. Now you can pass it, right? And I guess you could leave that module off the network, but of course you're going to have codes, and I can't just leave the instrument cluster off of the network. So that's an issue, right? And I'm explaining this to him like, hey, if we get here and we prove this, you're gonna have to replace the cluster. He's like, and this is the part right here that I'm doing this episode for, so that you can get ahead of this when you're in this type of situation, with your customer, whoever that might be. Is he's like, well, there was nothing wrong with the cluster. Like, why would I be buying an instrument cluster for this? And this is where, I've taken a little bit of time to research this stuff and explain that, hey, there's an online security handshake that happens with these modules when you are replacing one. And it doesn't matter which one you are replacing, that security handshake has to happen between all the modules in order to get that one, together with everybody else. And what seems to be happening, for what reason I don't know, is some of these modules, and GM lists the telematics, the instrument cluster, and the airbag as being some of the more common ones, they will not, give this thumbs up. I don't know if it's the calculation that's wrong. I don't know. I'd just be speculating as to why. But something about the modules does not agree, and you have to get a new one. You put the new one on there, and you go through the programming, and it works just fine. But that's adding a module in that was otherwise working. There was nothing wrong with it before, but now you're saying that I have to do it. So for me, coming in programming these vehicles, I now have to warn customers ahead of time, and actually made up a little sheet and a diagram and an explanation so that we can shoot that to them if we're going in to program something on Global B and be like, hey, please read this because we're going to need your authorization before we get going, because there could be a module who is working now but is not going to agree to this security handshake. And there's no way around it. You're going to have to replace that if you want everything working, even if that wasn't your problem, right? Security gateway was the thing we were replacing. Camera was the actual problem. So, I mean, it would have been nice if we could have identified that and avoided all of this. But, it is what it is. But now you got to do a cluster too. And he understood. Again, I had to explain it to him because this is new. This isn't how older GMs necessarily worked. I have had this happen on side object detection modules where you replace one and then the other one doesn't agree with the hardware level and you end up having to do both. But this is just going to be more common on these vehicles. And again, the telematics module, really common on these things to see this. So he gets the dash apart and I had to leave. I come back. And here's the other tricky part about this is you can't just unplug the cluster. And I'm sure this is true of other modules as well, especially on GM CAN architecture, because they still like to daisy chain the network through the modules. What that means is if you unplug the module, you broke the network into two pieces. So that security data handshake is not going to work for that either. You're going to have to jump the network together, which is what I had to do. I jumped the pins together so I could complete the network without the cluster, and it passed. Okay. Now, you could take a roll of the dice and say, hey, it's failing for this module. Just get that module. And that's an option. But this is my first real adventure into one of these. And I don't know for sure. Is it going to pass once the cluster's off the line? And it did. It gave me the thumbs up. But of course, now I plug the cluster in and everybody's coding for the cluster. Like, hey, something's wrong here. I think they do list an actual code. It is U1962 is what's going to set. And again, they're pointing fingers at, hey, the cluster is, not agreeing to the security handshake. So the cluster needs to be replaced at that point. And they're going to get a cluster. I haven't even finalized this one. One other thing on the security gateway module itself, there is a configuration that you have to do with SPS after the programming. And I don't know if you could do it before or after, but the order of the process is after the security handshake is a network or a module configuration. And so what it does is it looks at all of the modules that are listed on the database of GM server for that VIN number. And then it learns which modules are on there. And it's just a setup feature that you run if you are in SPS and you click on the serial data gateway module. It's just set up and it configures it to all of the modules on the vehicle. All the modules have to be plugged in at that point in order to configure them. And if there is a module that is on the network that doesn't belong, it'll set an error. How do I know this? It was throwing an error for the telematics module. Okay. And this is just a little side adventure. This isn't even the main point of this, but you might run into it. And so the telematics module, which I mentioned, has had problems on other vehicles before. It was saying that that module was on the vehicle, but it wasn't listed on the database. And you're supposed to call GM's tech line if that's the case. And I did not want to sit around and do that. I suppose I could have, but I unplugged the telematics module and I ran the configuration again. It said, yep, cool, we're all good. So I don't know on that one what I'm going to come up with. And that could be another instance where, hey, we got to do a telematics module too. The only codes I had when I left the other day were for the cluster. So once they get the new cluster, we're going to try to button everything up. But you might run into some issues with that module configuration too. The other thing I found is you try to run that when modules that are supposed to be there are not there. It's also going to code and not let you complete that configuration. And you really can't utilize that vehicle properly if you don't complete that. So where does that become a problem where I see in the future? If you have modules that are just dead, not working for whatever reason, right? They're old, they broke, customer decided they want to fix them, but you've replaced the gateway module for something, it's going to say, hey, I'm looking for a side object detection module, but I don't see it. I can't complete this. I can't do this. So would you then have to buy, all new modules so that it's complete on the network? I don't know. That's another piece of this. This is an additional piece to the security handshake that you'll have to deal with on one of these vehicles. So it's getting crazy out there. And I guess the reason I'm doing this is to help you be prepared if you get involved in one of these vehicles. Maybe you got some experience and you can throw some advice out there for everybody listening. Feel free to reach out to me, or you can post in the Facebook group. But that's where I'm going to wrap this one up today. That's Global BGM and my first real adventure with one. But I'd like to say thank you out there to everybody for listening. Really appreciate it. But with that out of the way, let's get out there, start fixing the world one car at a time.